My daughter's future father-in-law spent most of a dinner explaining to me what a man in his position actually does. Senior Vice President of Operations. 1,400 people under him. He said not many people understand what that means. I told him it sounded like a lot of responsibility. I had bought that company 9 years earlier. I own it outright. It is one of 4. He did not know. My daughter and I had walked into that restaurant planning to tell them that night. We had agreed on when, and we had agreed on how. By the time the plates came down, I had decided not to. If you have ever sat across a table from somebody who had already made up their mind about you, stay with me on this one. Subscribe before you go any further, because I tell one of these every single day, and you are going to want the next one. Hit the like button while you are here. It genuinely helps this channel find the people it is meant for. And in the comments, tell me where you are watching from, and what time it is where you are. I like knowing where these end up. I will be reading every one of them. She called on a Sunday afternoon in March. 2 rings. Then my daughter's voice doing something it does not do. Daddy, are you sitting down? Nobody has ever said that to me, and then told me something small. I was standing at the counter with a knife in my hand, and half an onion on the board. I put the knife down. She said he had asked her the night before. On the balcony of his apartment in 41 degrees, and he had dropped the ring, and it had gone under a chair, and both of them had been on their knees on cold concrete, with a phone flashlight for a minute and a half before he could finish the sentence. She said she had already said yes by then anyway. I asked her if she was happy. She said, Daddy, I am so happy. She said it twice. She has never in her life said anything twice. I told her I was happy for her, and I asked her 4 or 5 questions I do not remember, and she talked for 11 minutes and I let her, and then she had to go because his mother was calling. Then I stood in my kitchen with a knife on the board and half an onion going brown, and I did not turn a light on for a while. I have 1 child. Adele came in and found me in the dark and did not ask. She turned the light on, looked at the onion, looked at me, and put the kettle on. She said, well. I said, well. She said, our girl. I said, our girl. She said, you knew this was coming. I said, I did. She said, then why are you standing in the dark? I did not have anything for that. His name was Brant Halloran. I had heard it at that kitchen table for a year and a half. I had met him twice. Adele had made her mind up in about 4 minutes, which is her way, and it had been favorable. He was 30. He was a planner in the supply chain group at a manufacturer on the west side of Cincinnati, which is where the 2 of them met, and I will come back to that building, because everything in this story happens inside it. The next morning I called Naomi and asked when we were meeting his people. I was looking forward to it, not nervous, looking forward to it. My daughter had picked a man who got up and went to work, and I was about to sit down across from whoever raised him and find out what I was joining. Adele bought a dress in the first week of April for a dinner that was 6 months out. She showed it to me on a hanger in the bedroom doorway. Navy, 3/4 sleeves, nothing that announced itself. She said, is it too much? I said it was not too much. She said, because I do not want to look like I am trying. I did not think anything about that either. 31 years married, and I did not hear what my wife was telling me, which was that she had already worked out that these people were going to be measuring, and she had decided to give them nothing to measure. I offered the restaurant. There is a place in Over the Rhine that a friend of mine opened in 2009, with money I put in, and I still hold a small piece of it. Best food in this city, and it is not close. I do not have a reserved table, nothing that formal, but if I call on a Tuesday for a Thursday, there is a table. I called Roger Halloran to offer it. That was the first time I heard the man's voice. He said, no, let me handle this one. He was warm about it. He said it was their turn. He said he wanted to do it properly, and that a thing like this only happens once, and that he had a place in mind. Then he booked a steakhouse downtown called Farron's, and when he called back to confirm, he mentioned that a table on a Thursday had taken some doing. He mentioned it twice. The second time he said the maitre d' owed him one. I called my friend and canceled. 3 weeks later, Adele bought a second dress, because the first one was for June, and the dinner had moved to October. Roger moved it. The reason he gave was that October worked better for them. None of that meant anything to me at the time. A man wanted to host his son's engagement dinner, and a man wanted a date that suited him. It was a year before I laid it all out on paper and counted 11 separate things that had been exactly the same thing. The Hallorans did not know one thing about me that mattered. I own a holding company called Broadmoor Industrial, 4 operating businesses under it: flow control, precision castings, a distribution outfit in Indiana, and a company that makes filtration housings for water treatment. 3,100 people, almost none of them know my name. That is not modesty. That is how a holding company works, and it is how I run mine. I buy a business, I put an operator in the chair, and I get out of the building. I see each of my 4 chief executives twice a month. I go to each plant maybe twice a year, and when I do, I walk the floor with the plant manager and ask about lead times. And if you ask the second shift who the man in the good shoes was, most of them would tell you he was from a bank. Caldwell Pike Manufacturing sits in 190,000 square feet on the west side of Cincinnati and makes industrial valves and actuators. 1,400 people. I bought it 9 years ago from a family that had run it for 3 generations and had run out of anybody who wanted to. My signature is on page 41 of that purchase agreement. The sign on the building says Caldwell Pike. It has never said Rawls. Brant Halloran worked in that building. So did his father. So did my daughter. 2 weeks before the dinner, Naomi and I sat in my kitchen and worked out how to tell them. She wanted it done. She had been carrying it at that plant for 5 years, and now she was marrying somebody inside the same 4 walls, and the arithmetic was getting harder every month. We agreed on after the entrees, not before. Let people eat first, then hand them something heavy. Adele wanted it in the first 10 minutes. I said no. I said if we tell them first, we will never find out who they are. I said it as a joke, standing at my own counter, about people I had not met. We got there at 7. We got there at 7. They were already at the table. Roger stood up to shake my hand and put his other hand on top of mine. He is a big man, 6'2", thick through the shoulders, the kind of 62 that still does something physical on weekends. Blazer, no tie, a watch. He turned toward me while we shook. Priscilla Halloran stayed in her seat and offered her hand across the table, at an angle that made me lean for it. She told us to call her Prissy inside the first 30 seconds. Brant hugged Naomi and said something in her ear, and she laughed. They looked good together. That is a thing nobody says in a story like this, and it was true. 2 people the same age who did the same job and found each other in a break room, and she had her hand in his coat pocket while they were standing there, and she did not know she was doing it. The waiter came for drinks, and Roger asked me, "Do you drink wine?" Not what do you like? Not would you like some? Do you drink wine? I said I did, occasionally. He said, good, and ordered for the table without showing anybody the list. For about 11 minutes it was fine. Parking, the Bengals, whether the tunnel construction on Fort Washington Way was ever going to end. Then Roger asked me what I did. I said I was in industrials, some interests in manufacturing, mostly Ohio and Indiana. Every word of that is true. It is also the least informative, accurate sentence I know, and I have used it 400 times at parties, and I watched him take it and file it. You can see it happen. There is a small settling in a man's face when he puts you somewhere below him. It is not cruelty, it is filing. Adele said, he is being modest. Roger patted the table twice and said, well, that is all right. And he moved his chair back from the table about 2 inches. Then he told me what he did. He talked for 6 minutes without a question in it. Senior Vice President of Operations, 1,400 employees, and he said the number twice. The square footage, the new coordinate measuring machine they put in last year, which cost what a house costs. Then he leaned back and said, not many people really understand what a job like that means. I said it sounded like a lot of responsibility. He said it was. Then he asked how many people I had. I said it depended how you counted. He laughed and said, that is a small business answer. He was not wrong. It is a small business answer. It is also the answer you give when the real number is 3,100, and you have decided not to say it out loud. Prissy asked Adele what she did. Adele said she had been a principal for 29 years, and she named the school, and she named the neighborhood. Prissy said, oh, in the city. That was it. That was the whole response. Oh, in the city. And then a pause where a question should have gone. Adele said, yes, in the city, and drank some water. Then Prissy said, and where are you from originally? Adele said, Cincinnati. Prissy said, no, but originally. Adele looked at her for a second. Then she said, Avondale, which is 4 miles from where we were sitting. Prissy said, oh, and turned to the bread. My wife ran a building with 900 children in it for 11 years. She has stood between a father and a teacher. She has been screamed at by a school board member on a Tuesday night and gone home and made dinner. She sat at that table and drank her water and let it go, and I watched her do it, and I knew what it was costing her, and I did nothing. Nobody at that table said anything you could put in a report. There is not a word in what I have just told you that a reasonable person could not defend at length. Anybody who has sat at that table knows exactly what I am describing, and anybody who has not is going to tell me I am being sensitive. The salads came, and the wedding came with them. Roger said they had been talking. He said they understood. A wedding is a significant expense. He said, and we are prepared to carry more than our share. On its own, that is a generous thing to say. If he had stopped there, I would have thanked him. He said a version of it 4 times in the next hour. The second time it was, we do not want anybody stretching. The third time he asked me directly what I would be comfortable with, and he put a little weight on the word comfortable. Naomi's hand went flat on the table next to her glass. I have seen my daughter do that exactly twice. The other time was at a funeral. Somewhere in there, Roger noticed my watch. It was a gift from Adele for our 30th, and it is not a loud thing, and he leaned in to look at it. He said, "That is a good-looking piece. You know, the replicas they make now are unbelievable. You honestly cannot tell." And he sat back. Adele stopped moving. I said, "That is what I hear." Prissy brought up the venue. She said the place they had in mind had a certain feel to it. She used that phrase, a certain feel, and then she asked how many people we would be bringing. Adele said about 60. Prissy said, "Oh, and are they mostly local?" Adele said they were. Prissy said, "Good, that is easier. Read that back and find the sentence you could take to somebody." There is not one. That is the design. The entrees came, and Roger complimented my daughter. He said she was a hard worker. He said she had really earned everything she had, and he said earned twice with a little push on it. He said she was so articulate in meetings. Then he told a story about a review she had presented, where one of his directors said afterward that she was impressive. He told it to me, not to her. She was 4 feet away, and he told the story about her to me, in the past tense, like she was a report. Every sentence in that paragraph is a compliment. Try to find the one you would object to. Then he said, "And honestly, that is what I love about that company. Nobody cares where you came from." Brandt had said almost nothing for 40 minutes. He was not enjoying it. That much was visible from across the table. He was moving food around. He looked at his water twice while his father was talking. Once, when Prissy said something about the guest list, he said, "Dad." 1 syllable. Low. Roger said, "What? I am being practical." And Brandt let it go. Later, Naomi started saying something about her work, about the actuator build schedule, and Roger cut into the middle of her sentence to explain her own job to me. I watched my daughter's face do nothing at all. She had been at that plant 5 years being nobody, and she was extremely good at doing nothing at all with her face. And I watched a 30-year-old man watch his father talk over his fiancé and choose the plate. They cleared the plates. That was my cue. That was the moment we had agreed on 2 weeks earlier in my kitchen. And before I could get to it, Roger asked me whether I had gone to college. I said I had. 2 years at Cincinnati State, then night classes for 6 more while I worked. He said, "Good for you." 2 words. He said them the way you say them to a boy who has brought home a report card that is better than expected. Then he leaned back with his arm over the empty chair beside him and said the thing that ended it, and he did not know he was doing anything at all. He said, "Well, look, down the road, when the kids need help, a house, or if there is a medical thing, whatever it turns out to be, Prissy and I will be there. We are in a position to be there, and that is not something you need to worry about. You just get yourself there." He was telling me, at my daughter's engagement dinner, that he would take care of my child, because I could not. I looked at Naomi, and Naomi looked back at me, and moved her head about 1/4 of an inch, side to side. That was the plan going away. My 27-year-old daughter made that call across a tablecloth in half a second, and I agreed with her. So I said, "That is very kind of you." And Roger Halloran said, "We take care of family." And everybody at that table said nothing, and the waiter came and asked about dessert. And when the check came, I took it, and Roger objected twice and then allowed it. $381. Roger walked us out. He shook my hand in the lobby with both hands again, and told me it had been a real pleasure, and that we would be seeing plenty of each other. Prissy told Adele her dress was lovely, and that navy was a safe color on anybody. I put the receipt in my inside jacket pocket and I did not think about it again for a year. Let me stop for 1 second, because we are coming up on the part I have never laid out for anybody in one piece, including the woman who was sitting next to me. If you are still here, do me a favor, subscribe, not later, now, while you are thinking about it. I put a new one of these up every single day. Real stories about what people show you about themselves when they think you cannot do anything about it. Hit the like button on your way past. And in the comments, give me the honest answer to this. I had one sentence that would have ended that man's night, and I owned the building he had spent an hour bragging about, and I said thank you and paid the check. Was that strength, or was it something else? I still do not know. Tell me, I read all of them. The drive home is 11 minutes, and my wife did not speak for 8 of them. Then she said, I have never wanted to leave a table more in my life. I said I knew. She said, and you sat there. I said I did. She said, why? And I told her the truth, which is that I have been Booker Rawls in a room with a Roger Halloran maybe 900 times since I was 19 years old. At 19, I would have said something. At 30, I would have said something. Somewhere in my 40s, I worked out that saying something is a thing you do for yourself, and almost never a thing that changes the man across from you. She said, that is not a reason. That is a habit. I did not answer her. We drove the last 3 minutes and pulled into the garage, and she went inside ahead of me. Naomi called her mother the next day and they talked for 2 hours. She did not call me for 6 days. Those were 6 long days. I checked my phone the way a man checks a phone he has decided not to check. Adele told me to leave her alone. I left her alone. When Naomi finally called, the first thing she said was that she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She said, I am not apologizing for them. I am apologizing because I made you sit there. Then she told me what the 6 days had been. She had not been upset with me, and she had not been deciding anything about Brant yet. She had been trying to work out how to say one specific thing to her father, which was that she had watched me get talked down to for 2.5 hours, and had said nothing either. She had absorbed it too. She had done the exact thing she was 3 weeks away from ending an engagement over, and she knew it, and it took her 6 days to be able to put it in her mouth. I told her the difference. A person under it does what they have to do to get through the night. The man in the chair beside them, who is not under it, is making a choice. She said she was not sure that was a difference. I said, ask me again in 20 years. She said, that is not an answer. I said, no, it is not. She talked to Brant on a Saturday. She has told me she went into that conversation genuinely expecting him to be angrier than she was. She laid it out, the originally, the articulate, the good for you. You just get yourself there. And Brant said, I know. I heard it. She said, then why did you not say anything? And he said, that is just how they are. You cannot take it personally. If you make it a thing now, it is going to be a thing for the next 30 years. She said, so I should get used to it. He said, I am saying pick your battles. He was not being cruel. I've turned that conversation over for 2 years, and I have never once been able to make him cruel in it. He was doing the thing he had done in that house since he was 9 years old, which is manage his father by absorbing him, and he was handing my daughter the technique that had kept him safe his whole life. He thought he was helping her. He did not hear himself asking her to be smaller in that family for 30 years, with nobody on her side, married to a man whose plan was the plate. She did not end it that day. She did not throw anything at anybody. She thought about it for 9 days. She came to the house twice in that stretch, and did not bring it up either time. The first time she reorganized the pantry. The second time she sat on the back steps with her mother for 2 hours, and I stayed inside. Adele told me afterward that Naomi had asked her one question that whole time, which was, how you know the difference between a man who will grow and a man who has simply not been tested yet. Adele told her the truth, which is that you do not know, and that you are betting either way, and that the only thing you get to choose is what you are willing to lose the bet on. I know what happened in those 9 days, because she told me a year later, in the car, on the way back from something else. She made a list, not of his faults, of moments. Every time in 8 months that his mother had said something and he had let it sit. There were 4 before the dinner, and Naomi had not registered a single one of them at the time. A comment about her hair at a lunch in June. Something about her apartment, a remark about how nice it was that she had gotten so far without connections, which Naomi had found funny that day, for reasons Prissy Halloran could not have understood. 4. He had been present for 3. Every time he had done the same thing, which was change the subject pleasantly. Naomi says the worst one was the hair, because he had laughed, not at her. It was a small laugh, the kind you do to move a room along, and it had worked, and everybody had moved along. She had laughed too. That is the part she cannot get out. She said the list was what did it, because 1 dinner is a bad night, and 4 is a pattern, and a pattern is a forecast. Then she said the part I have thought about more than anything else in this. She said she sat with the question of whether she could do it anyway. Marry him and simply decide, in advance, to absorb it for 30 years, the way he was asking. And she said the honest answer was yes. She could have. She knows she could have, because she had already been doing a version of it inside that plant for 5 years. And she said that was exactly why she was not going to. On a Monday evening, she drove to his apartment and gave the ring back. She told him she could not marry into a family that would look at her mother the way his mother had. She told him she could have survived that. What she could not survive was that he had watched it happen and had asked her to be smaller. He asked if this was about the money thing. She said no. It is about you saying dad and then eating your food. He did not have anything for that. She has told me she stood in that hallway another 10 or 15 seconds waiting to see whether he would, and that the waiting is the part she thinks about, not the leaving. I did not give her that sentence. I have asked her twice whether she rehearsed it, and she says she did not. There are 2 things about that table you do not have yet. The first is who my daughter actually was. When Naomi was about 15, I decided she was not going to be handed anything, and I have been asked about that decision by a lot of people since, and I would make it again. I did not do it to be hard on her. I did it because I have sat on boards with second-generation men who inherited a chair at 31 and have never once in their lives had to be right about something when there was a consequence for being wrong. They are not bad men. They are unfinished. There is a specific kind of steadiness that only comes from having been wrong in front of somebody who could fire you, and if you skip it, you never get it, and everyone around you can tell. So when she finished school with a supply chain degree, she did not come work for me and she did not get a title. She applied to Caldwell Pike Manufacturing as a materials coordinator at $49,000 a year through the same online portal as everybody else, in a department of 31 people. She used her mother's name, Naomi Cade. Adele fought me on the whole thing for about 6 weeks. She said I was running an experiment on my own child. She said that if it went badly, Naomi would never be able to separate whether she failed or whether I had set her up to. I said if she needs the name to make it, then she needs the name. Adele said, and if she does need it? I did not have an answer for that in 2018, and I do not have one now. It happened not to be true, and that is luck, and I have never once pretended to myself that it was anything else. That was not a deception, and the mechanics matter, because people ask. Cade is her legal middle name. It is on her birth certificate, and she had used it at 2 internships already. She did not lie on an application, and she did not falsify 1 line. She simply did not volunteer that the man who owned the holding company, that owned her employer, was her father. Nobody asked. Why on earth would anybody ask? One person knew. Yvette Doran runs Caldwell Pike, and I told her before Naomi applied, and I told her one other thing, which was that if Naomi turned out to be no good, Yvette was to manage her out like anybody else, and I did not want a phone call about it first. Yvette said, understood. Then she said, and if she is good? I said, then she is good, and you will find out the same way you find out about anybody. We never discussed it again for 5 years. Naomi started in materials, moved to planning, and by year 4 she was a senior planner running the build schedule on the actuator line. $200 million of revenue, 400 people whose week gets ruined if she gets it wrong. In year 3, she found $612,000. She did not find it by being clever. She found it by being irritated. She had been chasing a machining complaint for 3 weeks. Operators kept scrapping valve bodies at the second operation, and the quality group kept closing the tickets as operator error, because incoming inspections said the castings were clean. Anybody sensible accepts that. The data said the castings were clean. That is what data is for. Naomi went down to receiving instead, and stood there for 2 hours on a Tuesday morning, watching a man named Wendell Pruitt do his job. What she noticed was that he was pulling one part off a skid of 40. She asked him why 40. He said because that is what the screen tells me. She pulled the sampling plan out of the system and it said 1 in 40. Then she pulled the supplier quality agreement out of the contract folder, which is a PDF nobody opens, and the agreement said 1 in 10. The number had been changed in a software migration 4 years earlier, not maliciously. Somebody mapping fields between two systems put a value in the wrong column and it went live, and for 4 years a supplier had been graded on a quarter of the inspection it was contractually owed. $612,000 of suspect castings on the floor in an inventory. She wrote it up herself. 11 pages, with the contract language, the screenshots, the scrap history, and a corrective action she had already drafted. Her director took it to Yvette. Yvette brought it to me in a monthly review as a good news item about a promising young planner in her supply chain group, and I sat there with my hands folded and let a woman tell me about my own child. That is one of maybe 6 proudest moments of my life, and nobody in that room knew it was happening. Brant Halloran, her fiancé, was a planner in that same group. Same band, same pay grade, 1 row over from her. They were friends for about a year, before they were anything else. She brought him to the house in the spring. I liked him. He was easy in a room. He asked my wife about her school, and then listened to the whole answer, which almost nobody does. He took his shoes off in the front hall without being asked. When I asked about his work, he talked competently for 11 minutes, and he knew his job. He was also, I could see, a man who had never had to hold a position under pressure. There was a moment at that first dinner where Adele said something mildly provocative about a school funding levy, and I watched him check Naomi's face before he answered. Small thing. Most men do it at 30. I did it at 30. I filed it and forgot it for a year and a half. 6 weeks after the engagement, Brant was promoted. He went from senior planner to manager of operational excellence, a role that did not exist in the organization chart in January and did exist in March, reporting to a director who reported to Roger Halloran, senior vice president of operations. Naomi told me on the phone, and she was happy about it, and I said congratulations, and I asked one question, whether his father had been involved in the decision. She said he had recused himself. I said good, and I meant it, and I did not think about it again for 9 months. There is no world in which the owner of a holding company hears about a manager-level promotion at one of 4 operating businesses. That is 4 layers below the lowest thing that reaches me. Roger Halloran had been at Caldwell Pike 26 years. He was there 17 years before I bought it. He started as a production supervisor and worked his way up, and this matters, so it goes in. The man was operationally competent. He knew that plant. He could tell you the cycle time on any cell in the building. When we did acquisition diligence 9 years ago, his name came up twice, in a good way. He was 62, $410,000 a year with bonus, plus long-term incentive units worth about $600,000 on paper, vesting over 4 years. A house in a nice township north of the city, a place on a lake in Kentucky, a boat he mentioned within 11 minutes of meeting me. Insofar as he understood the world, he had done every bit of it himself. The second thing is my father. Roosevelt Rawls ran a horizontal boring mill for 31 years at a foundry off Spring Grove Avenue. I grew up in the West End in 3 rooms where you could hear the trains. He was on his feet 9 hours a day. He came home with metal in the creases of his hands that no soap ever entirely took out, and when I was small, I thought that was what a father's hands looked like. He was the best machinist in that building. The foreman said so. Other men said so. In 31 years, he was never once in a room where a decision was made. That is where all of this comes from. My father was better at his work than the men who told him what to do, and he did it for 31 years, and nobody ever asked him a single question about how the place ought to be run. I bought my first machine shop in 1993. 11 employees, a leaking roof, 1 customer who paid in 90 days when he felt like it. 4 banks turned me down before that. The 4th one I remember. A loan officer on Reading Road went through my numbers for 20 minutes and could not find anything wrong with them, and then he told me the program I was applying under was really designed for people with more industry experience. I had 11 years in that industry. I told him so. He said, of course, and closed the folder. The 5th bank said yes. Dolores Canigan, about 50, read my plan twice in front of me and asked 4 questions about receivables, and then said she thought the roof was going to be a problem. She was right about the roof. I banked with that woman for 19 years and moved my accounts twice to follow her. My father came to see the shop once. Saturday, fall of 1994. He walked the whole floor with his hands behind his back. the way he did, and stopped at every machine long enough to make everybody nervous. He did not say it was good. He did not say he was proud. He asked whether I owned the building or leased it. I said leased. He made a sound. At the end, he stopped at a Bridgeport, put 2 fingers on the table, and moved it about an inch, and said the ways needed scraping. I said I knew. He said, well then. And then he went out and sat in the truck for 20 minutes while I finished up, because he did not like being inside a building he did not work in. That is the entire review I ever got from my father on the thing I did with my life. 4 words and a machine that needed work. I had it scraped that November, and I have never told anybody why I bothered, because we were not running anything on that mill that needed the tolerance. I sold that shop in 2004 for a number that was not life-changing, but was enough to buy 2 more things. Those 2 things bought another thing. That is the whole story, and there is nothing clever in it. You buy a business nobody wants, you fix what is broken, you do not take money out for 8 years, and you do it again. He died in March of 1997. 3 years after he stood at that Bridgeport, he never saw 1 square foot of what I own now. We cleaned out the apartment that same weekend, 3 days after the funeral. Adele was pregnant with Naomi, and was not supposed to be lifting anything, and lifted everything anyway. There was not much. A man who works 31 years and raises a son in 3 rooms does not accumulate the way people think. The coffee can was on the closet shelf behind a hat. Folgers, with the plastic lid still on it. Inside were his discharge papers, my mother's death certificate from 1988, 2 photographs, a set of feeler gauges wrapped in a rag, and an envelope. In 1974, my father applied for a job at Caldwell Pike Manufacturing. He was 41. 11 years on a boring mill, a foreman's letter, and a reputation in a city where that industry was small enough that reputations traveled. Caldwell Pike was the better shop, better equipment, better money, and 8 minutes closer to our apartment, which mattered because we had 1 car. They turned him down. The letter is 4 sentences. It thanks him for his interest. It says they filled the position with a candidate whose background more closely matched their requirements. It says they will keep his application on file for 6 months. He kept it for 23 years. I read it standing in that closet, and then I sat down on the floor of my father's bedroom in a building I grew up in, and I could not have told you at the time what I was feeling. Adele found me down there 10 minutes later. She read it over my shoulder, standing up, holding the small of her back the way you do at 6 months. She did not say anything either. She put a hand on the top of my head and left it there a while, and then went back to the kitchen because there were boxes. 25 years after he died, I bought that company. It would be a much better story if I had bought it out of revenge. That is not what happened, and I am not going to sell it to you. I bought it because it was a well-run business, with an aging owner, and no succession, and a customer base I understood, and my team ran the model, and the number worked. I did not know it was the same company until we were 4 weeks into diligence. I was in a data room on the 11th floor of a building downtown, at about 9 at night, going through the incorporation history, because I go through everything, and there was a line item about a name change in 1969, and a predecessor entity. I read that line 3 times, and then I sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a while, and a young associate asked me if I was all right, and I said I was fine and asked him to pull the pension records. I never told anybody, not my chief financial officer, not my wife, for 2 years. And in 9 years, I never once walked into that building and thought about that letter, until a Thursday night in October when a senior vice president of that company told me he would take care of my daughter down the road, because I was not in a position to. I did not investigate Roger Halloran. That is the difference between what happened and what people assume happened, so I am going to be exact about it. I never called Yvette Doran about that dinner. She found out about it 18 months later from Naomi, not from me. What I did was ask a question I should have asked 4 years earlier. November, 3 weeks after the dinner. Quarterly review, going through operating metrics on all 4 businesses, and we hit a slide on voluntary turnover in the salaried population at Caldwell Pike. 19% climbing for 3 years. 19% is not a crisis. It is a number that quietly costs real money, and it had been on that slide going up for 3 years, and every quarter somebody said something about the labor market and we moved on. I asked how promotions worked, not who got promoted, how the process worked, who nominates, who approves, whether there is a slate, whether anybody outside the reporting line ever lays eyes on a candidate before the decision is made. Yvette said she would come back to me. She came back in 9 days, and she came to my office to do it, which she does not do. Yvette Doran and I have run 4 businesses together for 7 years, almost entirely by phone. She sat down and said, "Before I start, I need to tell you I am angry, and it is not at you. There was no promotion process in the operations organization. There was one in engineering, one in finance, one in commercial. In operations, which is 1,100 of the 1,400 people in that building, the vice president approved his own slate. That had been true since before I owned the place." Then she said, "And while I was pulling that, human resources flagged something." Everything in the next 4 minutes was sitting in that company's own systems the entire time. Any competent person could have found all of it in a week, at any point in 11 years. Nobody looked, because he was the man who looked. Yvette said it plainer than that. She said, "In 7 years in this chair, I never once questioned Roger Halloran. And when I asked myself why, the honest answer is that he had been there 9 years longer than me and had never given me a reason to. I told her that is the reason it works. She did not take it as comfort, and I did not mean it as any. She said I should have looked in year 1. I said so should the 3 people before you. 17 people had been hired into Roger Halloran's organization over 11 years, who were related to him or to his wife, or were the children of people related to them. 2 nephews, a son-in-law of his sister, his wife's brother's daughter, a neighbor of 19 years and that man's 2 sons, and Brant, 17. Not all at once, and not all badly. Some of those people are good at their jobs. One of the nephews is still there and by every account is excellent. There was no disclosure form on file for any of them. The company had a related party disclosure policy going back to 2003. It required a written disclosure and a recusal memo signed by the hiring manager's superior. 0 on file, 0 out of 17, across 11 years, including Brant's, where he told his son he was recusing himself, and where his own signature is on the compensation approval for the role 3 weeks later. Manager of Operational Excellence did not exist before March. It was created by a requisition from a director who reported to Roger. It was posted internally for 4 days, which is the minimum, over a holiday week. It was posted the week of the 4th of July. There were 2 applicants. The other one was a woman named Sherelle Bond, who had been in that department 9 years. I read her file on a Sunday at my kitchen table. All of it. Every review at the top band. 2 process improvements with hard savings attached. One of them $140,000 a year that is still running. She held a certification the job posting listed as preferred that Brant Halloran did not have. There was a note in her file from year 6. A director had written that she was not quite ready for the next level and would benefit from broader exposure. The same phrase appears in year 7, word for word. Same director, copied forward. Broader exposure is a thing you give somebody. It is not a thing they can go out and get on their own, and for 4 years the man responsible for giving it to her wrote down that she needed it and then did not give it to her, and each time it went in the file and made the next no easier. She had applied for 4 internal roles in 9 years and gotten none of them. 4 in 9 years, at the top band every single review. I sat at that table on a Sunday morning and read A Stranger's Career and had to get up and walk around the room, and Adele came in and asked what was wrong, and I said nothing, and she looked at the folder and did not ask again. She resigned in July, 11 weeks after Brant got the job. Her exit interview is 1 paragraph and says she was pursuing other opportunities. It is signed by a human resources coordinator who was 24 years old. 9 years, and the company's entire written record of why she left is 31 words typed by somebody who had been there 8 months. Then Yvette got to the vendor. There is a fabrication shop in northern Kentucky called Tri-State Fabrication and Assembly. Caldwell Pike had been buying weldments from them since 2018, $4.1 million over 6 years. Not one competitive quote in that entire period. Every purchase order sat under the threshold that would have required a second signature, which meant every one was approved inside operations and procurement, never ran a bid. Tri-State Fabrication and Assembly is 60% owned by Prissy Halloran's brother. Nepotism is a judgment problem and a culture problem. I have opinions about it, and it is not, by itself, a fireable offense at every company on earth. Directing $4.1 million of company spend to a business your family owns, without disclosure, in violation of a written policy you personally signed an acknowledgement for in 2003, and again in 2011, and again in 2019, is self-dealing. Yvette asked me what I wanted to do. I told her it was her company to run, and that she should do exactly what she would do if the man's last name meant nothing to anybody, and that if she wanted my opinion afterwards, she could have it. She said, "I do not need it." That is why she is in that chair. There were 4 months between that conversation and the termination, and what I did during them was nothing. I ran 4 businesses. I refinanced the Indiana distributor. I sat on 4 boards. I went to a wedding in Louisville for the son of a man I have known since 1996. I asked Yvette exactly 2 questions about Caldwell Pike in that period, and both of them were about a capital project on the coating line. I never asked about the audit, not once. That was deliberate, and it was not restraint. It was the only way the thing could mean anything. The moment I ask, it becomes mine. The moment it becomes mine, every person in that building, whoever hears the story, gets to say that the owner's daughter had a bad dinner, and a man lost his job, and they would be right to say it. And Sherelle Bond's 9 years would go back to meaning nothing. Adele asked me in January whether I knew what was going to happen. I said no. That was true. A process was running. I did not know what it would find, and I did not know what Yvette would do with it. And here is the one place I could easily make myself look better than I was, so I am not going to. I hoped. I hoped for 4 months, and I did not do one thing about it, and those are 2 separate facts, and both of them are mine. They terminated Roger Halloran for cause on a Tuesday in February. I was not there. I have been in a room with Roger Halloran exactly once in my life, and it was at Farron's. Yvette did it herself, with Nelson Baptiste from Human Resources, an outside counsel on a conference line. It ran 40 minutes. The first 35 were him explaining. He explained that Tri-State was the best option available, and that their lead times were better than anybody's. He explained that everyone knew about his brother-in-law, and that it had never been a secret. He explained that the hiring policy was not enforced anywhere in that company, and that if they were going to apply it to him, they had better apply it to everybody. That last one was a fair point. It is the reason there were 4 other terminations in that building over the following 6 months, none of which had anything to do with my family, and one of which I regret. Nelson has told me that around minute 30 Roger stopped and asked for water, and drank all of it, and put the glass down and sat looking at the table for a while. Then he said, "Who signed off on this?" Yvette told him the decision was hers. He said, "No. Who reviewed it? Who is the owner? I have been here 26 years, and I have never had a conversation with an owner in my life, and I want to know who is behind this." Nelson Baptiste said the name of the holding company. Roger said, "And who is that?" And Yvette Doran said, "Booker Rawls. 9 years, 1,400 people, 26 years in that building, 17 of them, before I ever signed anything. And that was the first time the man had heard my name." Nelson told me afterward that there were about 4 seconds of nothing. He said the man's face did not move. Then Roger said it out loud, "Booker Rawls, the way you say a name you are checking the spelling of." Then he said, "That is Naomi's father." And Yvette said, "That is correct." People ask me whether I wish I had been in that room. No. And it is not because I am a better man than that. It is because if I had been in that room, the moment would have belonged to me, and it does not. It belongs to a man at a conference table, working out in 4 seconds, that the person he told to just get himself there had owned the building the whole time. He did not need me in there. I had already been there. He had just not been able to see me. He lost more than a job. For cause termination forfeits unvested long-term incentive units. He had 3 tranches outstanding worth about $440,000. He had a non-competition agreement, 18 months, signed in 2011, in exchange for a grant he had already cashed. Narrow, enforceable, and Ohio courts enforced those. It covered every valve and actuator manufacturer inside a radius that includes the 4 places a man with his resume would go. 62 years old, 26 years at one employer. A for-cause termination on his record, and 18 months, where the only work he could take was outside the industry he had spent his life in. He fought the non-compete. His lawyer sent 2 letters. Yvette forwarded them to me without comment, and I forwarded them back with 3 words, which were, "That is yours." She enforced it. There was never any real question. He had signed it himself in 2011 for money he had already spent. He never came back to it. He is 64 now, and does something part-time for a distributor 2 counties over. I know that only because Naomi knows it. and she does not enjoy knowing it, and she told me once, and has not brought him up since. The lake place went, the boat went. Brant's role was eliminated. That was not punishment, and Yvette would tell you the same. The position had been created outside process for a candidate selected outside process, and when they reran the requisition honestly, the honest conclusion was that the department did not need a manager of operational excellence. They offered him his old job at his old band. Same pay he had in February. Same desk. One row over from a woman who had given him a ring back 9 weeks earlier. Nobody thought that through. Nobody had to. He resigned 4 days later. He gave 2 weeks and worked all of them. Naomi says he was decent about it. Cleaned out his desk on a Friday afternoon when the floor was thin, said goodbye to about 6 people, and did not come near her. I understand that. I do not think it was wrong, and I would probably have done the same at 30. Yvette called Sherelle Bond in April and asked her to come back. She had taken a job at a competitor 40 minutes north. She said no, and she was polite about it, and Yvette told me she did not blame her one bit. 6 months later, Sherelle called Yvette herself and asked whether the offer still stood. She came back as a senior planner. She is a director now. She has no idea that a man she has never met read her performance file on a Sunday at his kitchen table and had to get up and walk around the room. I knew what I was looking at. My father applied to that same company in 1974. It got out at the plant in about 9 days. Somebody in human resources put together that the owner's last name and a senior planner's legal middle name were the same, and after that it took one conversation in a break room. Naomi has told me what the worst part was, and it was not the 2 people who said things to her face. It was the ones who reorganized her. People she had eaten lunch with for 4 years, went back through every interaction they had ever had with her, and reread all of it. The time she pushed back on a schedule change, the training slot she got, the promotion in year 4. All of it quietly refiled under a new heading, in real time, by people who had liked her the previous Thursday. A man she had personally trained said, in earshot, that it explained a lot. She had spent 4 months of her own time getting him up to speed on the scheduling system in her 2nd year. She remembers which 4 months. She did not defend herself, and she did not transfer. On the 2nd day, a scheduler named Berniso, 55 years old and 20 years in that building, came to Naomi's desk, said one sentence, and left. She said, "I saw you find the casting thing." Then she walked back to her desk. 60 feet. She never turned around. Naomi says she has never been more grateful to anybody in her life, and that they are not friends, and that they have never spoken about it since. What got her through the rest of it was a folder of her own. Every performance review she had received in 5 years, all of them written by people who did not know. She read them on Sunday nights for a while. Brant came back 4 times. The first was 2 weeks after she gave the ring back. A letter, 4 pages handwritten. She read it and did not answer it. The second was in December, before any of the audit existed, before anybody knew anything. He waited outside her building. He told her he had gone to his father and said he had been out of line at that dinner, and that his father had said he did not know what Brant was talking about. That is the truest sentence anybody said in this entire story, and it came to me secondhand out of Roger Halloran's mouth. He did not know what his son was talking about. He had no memory of that dinner being anything but pleasant. He went home that night and told his wife it went well. The 3rd time was April, after his father was terminated and after he had resigned. He was in a bad place, and he said things about the company and about me that Naomi has never fully repeated, and that I have never asked her to. The 4th time was September, almost a year after the dinner. He asked her for coffee and she went. He had lost the job. His father had lost the job. His mother's brother had lost a customer that was most of his business, and there had been something at a Thanksgiving about whose fault all of it was, and a portion of that fault had been assigned to Brant for bringing a woman into it. He mentioned that once, briefly, and then said it was not the point. What he said was that he had gone back over that dinner about 200 times and could recite it. That the thing he could not get past was not the moment his father talked over her. It was the 11 or 12 seconds after it, when he felt the whole table waiting and decided to let it go by. He said he had understood around the 6th month that he had been trained to do that, and that being trained to do a thing is an explanation and not a defense. Naomi says it was a genuinely good apology, and that she believes he meant every word. And she said no. She has explained it to me exactly once. She said the apology was accurate, and she did not doubt a syllable of it, and that a man understanding a thing about himself at 31 is not the same as a man having been a different person at 30. She said, he is going to be somebody's good husband. He will be good at it. He will not be mine, because I was there when he was not ready, and I am not spending 40 years being the woman who taught him. She was 28 when she said that. There was a folder in the credenza in my office. I put it together in September, a month before the dinner. I told nobody except Adele and a man at the bank. Naomi found it in March, helping me pull tax documents, and she opened it because it had her name on the tab. Inside was a purchase contract on a 5-bedroom house in Marymount, closed, paid, held in a trust with her name on it, with a possession date set for 2 weeks after the wedding. The keys were in an envelope taped to the inside cover, 2 of them on a ring with the little cardboard tag the title company puts on, and my daughter's married name written on that tag in somebody else's handwriting. There was a bill of sale for a vehicle, and there was an itinerary for 11 days in Portugal in a printed folder from a travel agent, with both their names on it, and a note in the margin in my handwriting reminding me to find out whether Brent had a passport. She had the keys in her hand the whole time. That is the part I keep. She was holding a set of keys to a house she was never going to live in a folder with a stranger's honeymoon in it, and she did not put them down for 20 minutes. She sat on the floor of my office and cried, and I sat in the chair and let her, because there was nothing to say that would have improved it. Then she said, "They thought you were poor." I said, "They thought I was something. Poor was just the word they had for it." She asked me why I did not tell them, that night, at the table, with all of it in a drawer 11 feet from where I had been standing that morning. And I told her what I had worked out in the 4 months since my wife told me my reason was a habit. A man who needs to be told is not a man who is going to hear it. I sold the house in Marymount 11 months later. I did not lose money on it, which is a stupid thing to be pleased about, and I was pleased about it anyway. The trip I did not cancel. Adele and I went. 11 days in Portugal, in the second week of June, the first vacation the 2 of us had taken alone in 9 years. On the 4th day, over breakfast, out of nowhere, my wife said she was glad. I asked her what about. She said that we found out in October and not in year 6. Then she went back to her eggs, and we did not talk about any of it again for the rest of the trip. I owe her one more thing here. In February, standing in our kitchen, I told her she had been right in the car. She said, "I know." Then she said the rest of it, which was that she had not been telling me to blow up a dinner. She said she had been married to me 31 years and had watched me be the most reasonable man in every room I ever walked into, and that she had spent a long time admiring it, and that somewhere in the last decade she had started wondering what it cost. She said, "You have gotten so good at it that I cannot tell anymore whether you are choosing it." Then she folded the towel and hung it on the oven door and went upstairs. That is the most accurate thing anybody has ever said about me, and my wife said it holding a dish towel. About a year later I found the receipt. $381, Farron's, in the inside pocket of a jacket where it had been the whole time. I stood in my closet holding it and worked out what I had done. My father kept 4 sentences in a coffee can for 23 years. I did the same thing with a dinner check. Same city, 61 years old, 4 companies, 3,100 employees, more money than my father could have counted, and I did not even notice I was doing it. You can win completely. You can own the building the man is bragging about, and you will still go home and put the paper in a pocket, in case somebody ever asks you to prove it happened. Nobody ever asks you to prove it. Naomi is 33 now. She stayed at Caldwell Pike, which took a level of nerve I am not certain I would have had. She runs the actuator business. $210 million, 440 people. It is a division that used to sit under the senior vice president of operations, which is to say, she now holds a piece of the job Roger Halloran had. Nobody arranged that. She got it from Yvette Doran over 2 other candidates, and I found out in a monthly review, the same way I found out about the castings. She is not married. She has been seeing somebody about 1.5 years who does something in hospital administration and who has been to the house twice, and I like him, and I have said nothing about it to anybody because I have learned exactly what my opinion is worth in these matters. I took her out to the plant once, about 1 year after she got the division, not for a meeting, a Saturday, with second shift running, and we walked the floor for 2 hours. We stopped at a horizontal boring mill and stood there a while, and I told her about her grandfather. Not the letter, just the machine, and the 31 years. and the metal in the creases of his hands. She asked if he would have liked the plant. I said he would have found 4 things wrong with it in 20 minutes, and told me about 3 of them. She said, "Which one would he not have told you about?" I said, "The one that was your fault." She laughed in a way I do not hear very often. Then we stood there a while longer, and a man came past with a pallet jack and nodded at her by name, and she nodded back. He had no idea who I was. There is no reason on earth he should have. On the way out, she stopped at the board by the time clock and straightened a notice that was hanging by one corner. Without breaking stride, without appearing to notice she had done it. Her grandfather used to do that. I have never told her. Adele asked me last year whether I regretted the way I did it. Not the dinner, the whole thing. 28 years of a rule about not handing my daughter anything, and then a folder and a credenza with a house in it. I said the folder was the reward for the rule. If I had handed her the house at 22, there would have been nothing left to reward, and she would be 33 years old with a house, and no idea what she could do. She said, "And if she had married him?" I said, "Then they would have had a house." I used to believe that people like Roger Halloran know what they are doing, that there is some small deliberate thing happening behind the eyes, and that if you catch them at it, they will at least have the decency to be caught. He did not know what his son was talking about. He went home from that dinner and told his wife it went well. He sat in a termination meeting, 26 years into a career, and could not name one thing he had done wrong, and he was not performing. There was no strategy in it. He could not see it. And the reason he could not see it is that the entire structure of his life had been built to keep it invisible to him. 17 people hired into his organization who were related to him. 11 years. And if you had asked that man on any day of those 11 years whether he believed in merit, he would have told you he had earned every single thing he had, and he would have believed it, and he would have been offended that you asked. That is the part people get wrong. It is not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy requires you to know. He gave his son a job that did not exist, and then sat at a table and told my daughter she had really earned everything, and he did not hear it. In his head, those 2 facts lived in different rooms, and there was no hallway between them. Every single thing that took Roger Halloran apart was already inside that building. 17 files, $4.1 million of purchase orders, 0 disclosure forms, sitting in a system anybody could have queried in a week, for 11 years, in a company I owned. Nobody looked, because the man in charge of looking was the man. I did not go after him. I asked one question about a promotion process at a quarterly review, 3 weeks after a man told me at dinner that he would take care of my daughter down the road, and I have never been able to convince myself those 2 things were unrelated, and I am not going to pretend otherwise for you. But I did not have to build anything. I did not have to find anything. It was all there the whole time. That is what happens to men like that in the end. Not because somebody comes for them, because one day somebody with authority is finally, genuinely curious. And there has never been a single moment in their entire career when they could have survived genuine curiosity. My father applied to that company in 1974 and got 4 sentences back and kept them in a coffee can for 23 years. I own it now. I have never told anybody in that building about the letter, and I am not going to. But twice a year I walk that floor with the plant manager, and I look at the men on the mills, and I know that any one of them might be better at his work than every person in the office, and that nobody is ever going to ask him one question about how the place ought to be run. That is still true. I own the building and it is still true, and I have not fixed it, and I do not entirely know how. My daughter runs a division out there. She started at $49,000 a year under a name nobody recognized, and in year 3, she found $612,000 that 4 levels of management had walked past. Nobody handed her that. And when a man at a dinner table looked at her and decided what she was, he was wrong in a way that was going to cost him everything he had. He just did not find out for another 4 months. If you got something out of this one, subscribe before you go. That is the one that actually matters. I put a new story up every single day, and the next one is already written. Hit like on the way out. It genuinely helps this reach the people it is for. And in the comments, tell me the honest thing. He apologized properly, a year later, and he meant it, and she said no. Was she right? I read every single one of them. I will see you in the next one.